They called us primitives, a forgotten race on a backwater world circling an unremarkable star. The Galactic Council never feared Earth. They never even looked our way, until they did. And by the time they saw what we were, it was already too late to stop us. The council chamber of Oryx Prime was vast, its ceiling hidden in a haze of silver light. Voices of 100 species echoed through the grand hall, tones and clicks, hums and roars, all woven into the diplomatic drone that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. At the center, on a raised platform, sat the Speaker of the Council, High Primarch Talvorin of the Ardent Dominion. His crest shimmered faintly with pride as he tapped one claw against the table. "Next item," he said. "The petition concerning Sol 3, local designation Earth." Laughter rippled across the chamber. "Ah, yes," said another voice, low and slithering, the ambassador of the Threx Combine. "The humans, still burning chemical fuels, still poisoning their own air. Hardly a civilization worth our notice." A representative from the Valari hives buzzed with amusement. "They broadcast music into space. Noise! Primitive vibrations of air they seem to enjoy." "They war among themselves constantly," another added. "A self-destructive species. Their extinction would save their biosphere." Talvorin let the murmurs die before continuing. "It is agreed, then, that the planet will remain uncontacted. They are beneath intervention, but—" He paused, his eyes narrowing as he read from the holographic file hovering before him. "Recent scans show they have begun constructing nuclear propulsion systems, primitive but capable of interplanetary travel." "Let them crawl to their moon," hissed the Threx ambassador. "They will never leave their cradle." But one voice did not laugh. At the end of the table sat a quiet, slim figure, Ambassador Rin of the Helian Accord. Unlike most, the Helians believed that every sentient race had potential, no matter how small. Rin tilted his head, his translucent skin pulsing faintly. "You mock them," he said softly, "but their rate of progress is unsettling. From fire to nuclear weapons in a few thousand cycles. If they ever unify—" "Unify?" Talvorin interrupted, his crest flaring in laughter. "A species that fights over water and color of skin? No, Ambassador. They will never unify!" The chamber roared with agreement. Rin fell silent. He had seen the recordings, though. He had seen the images from their conflicts, their space probes, their art. There was something in those human eyes, something fierce, something he could not define. The council moved on. The humans were forgotten again. Years passed. Earth changed. From the polluted skies of the 21st century rose a world no one had predicted. Old nations crumbled, new ones formed. When the first fusion drives ignited above the lunar surface, the stars no longer seemed unreachable. The Galactic Council noticed then, but still, they did not care. A decade later, the first alien vessel entered the Sol system. It was not a warship. It was a surveyor from the Threx Combine, its mission simple: observe, categorize, and harvest resources if possible. Its commander, Vorn Ka, did not expect resistance from a species that still used projectile weapons. He was wrong. When his ship entered orbit, human radar stations tracked it instantly. Within hours, global networks buzzed with images of the strange craft. Governments panicked. Scientists begged for communication. Military leaders demanded readiness. The alien ship ignored them, continuing its descent toward the Pacific. Then, something unprecedented happened. Every human satellite, every radio telescope, every defense system turned its attention to one single object. The United Earth Defense Command, a newly formed coalition that barely existed a month, gave one simple order: do not fire unless fired upon. The alien ship hovered for hours, scanning the oceans. When it released a probe into the waves, a U.S. Navy submarine intercepted the descent path, surfacing with warning lights blazing. Cameras streamed the encounter across the world, and for the first time in history, all of humanity watched the same event, together. The probe continued falling. The submarine fired a warning flare. The probe ignored it. The submarine launched a small missile. It struck. The probe exploded. Silence. Then, the alien ship turned its sensors toward the submarine and opened fire. A lance of energy split the water, boiling the surface. The submarine vanished. Millions watched the feed go dead. The next morning, humanity declared war, not against a nation, but against the unknown. The Galactic Council convened in alarm. "What are they doing?" demanded the Volari delegate. "They have no faster-than-light capability, no quantum communications, and yet they resist." "Reports indicate they have mobilized their entire planet," Rin said quietly, reading the data streaming across his console. "Factories repurposed overnight. New shipyards forming in orbit. They are organizing," Talvarin scoffed. "For what? To throw rocks at our fleets?" Rin looked up. "To survive." The council erupted in laughter again, but this time a faint unease lingered beneath the sound. Months later, the first human ships left orbit. Crude vessels, fusion-driven, armored in layers of recycled metals, guided by AI systems built from repurposed gaming hardware and Cold War satellites. They called them vanguards. The aliens found it amusing. They called them scrap heaps. But when the threats returned to Earth's orbit, they were met by a storm of electromagnetic interference. Jamming fields blinded their sensors. Kinetic projectiles, dense tungsten rods, ripped through their hulls at 12 kilometers per second. No energy weapons. No shields. Just raw, brutal physics. The Threx ship fell burning through the atmosphere, and humanity cheered. Weeks passed. More alien fleets arrived. Scouts, then patrols. Each one found a world transformed. The humans had built orbital defenses, improvised rail cannons, even space mines crafted from decommissioned satellites. Every encounter cost the invaders ships, lives, pride. The council began to take notice. "This cannot continue," said Talvoran, his voice sharp with disbelief. "They are a Tier 1 civilization at best. They should not be capable of resisting a combine fleet." "Perhaps you should not have underestimated them," Rin murmured. Talvorin slammed a clawed hand against the table. "We will not be humiliated by a feral species." He ordered a full pacification fleet to Sol, 200 warships, enough firepower to glass a planet. Rin tried to object. "High Primarch, please. If you push them, they will bow, Ambassador." Rin looked away. "No," he whispered. "They will bite." The fleet arrived in orbit months later, blotting out the stars. From the surface, humanity watched. Every telescope, every radar, every pair of eyes turned upward. No message came. Only silence, and then the aliens opened fire. Cities burned. Oceans boiled. Entire regions vanished beneath plasma bombardment. Humanity screamed, and the council watched in satisfaction, confident that the lesson had been taught. But something was wrong. The bombardment stopped, not because mercy was given, but because every orbital command relay the aliens used suddenly went dark. The human hackers had found a way in. The fleet's systems flickered. Scrambled, and one by one, ships began to lose control of their targeting networks. Automated defenses turned inward. Fire control systems looped. Chaos erupted. From the ruins below, Earth rose again, not in ships, not in armies, but in will. Every human nation, every surviving leader, every broken satellite dish broadcast the same message into space. "We are still here." The aliens heard it. The council heard it. The galaxy heard it. Rin, sitting alone in his embassy, whispered to himself, "They warned us with silence." And we laughed. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council realized something dreadful. Earth had been silent. Not because it was weak, but because it had been listening. And now, humanity had heard enough. They thought they'd silenced us. But when the smoke cleared and the fire dimmed, they realized Earth was not ashes. It was steel, bent, scarred, but unbroken. Humanity had stared into the face of annihilation and refused to die. The fleet above Earth drifted in chaos. Alien ships, sleek and perfect, spun helplessly, their systems corrupted by code written by humans barely a century into the digital age. They had called it Project Medusa, a last-ditch cyber weapon built in underground data vaults beneath what had once been Geneva. Medusa was primitive by council standards, but it didn't need elegance. It only needed rage translated into code. It infected the alien fleet like a virus through light itself, riding the same quantum comms the Threx used to coordinate. Within hours, every command chain fractured. Targeting systems glitched. Shields failed. Some ships self-destructed. Others fired blindly into the void. And through the confusion, the humans struck back. They launched crude orbital barges filled with tungsten rods and decommissioned nuclear warheads. They called them spearheads. Every impact turned kilometers of atmosphere into fire. Alien crews who had never known fear now screamed across subspace channels for help, but no help came. The Council watched in disbelief. "They've crippled an entire fleet?" Talvorin's voice cracked with fury. "With software?" Rin sat across from him, expression calm but eyes heavy. "They adapt," he said softly. "You underestimated how quickly desperation breeds innovation. They should not have the technology to—" "They don't," Rin interrupted. "They made it." The room fell silent. Outside, the galaxy began to whisper the unthinkable. That perhaps the primitives of Sol 3 were not so primitive after all. Weeks turned into months. The war changed shape. Humanity was not fighting for victory. They were fighting for time. Cities rebuilt underground. Factories moved to orbit. Every resource, every ounce of human will poured into defense. From shattered orbital debris, they built something new. The Aegis Line, a wall of defensive platforms circling Earth like a crown of steel. Crude, ugly, unstoppable. The aliens called it barbaric, inefficient, wasteful. But when they tried to break through, the Aegis Line turned the heavens into a graveyard. No shields, no lasers, just kinetic death, missiles, rail slugs, fragments traveling faster than thought. The aliens had never fought a species that weaponized debris itself. Rin watched the reports unfold in the council chambers, his colleagues speechless. "They fight like they were born for it," murmured the Valeri ambassador. "Even the Dominion never resisted this hard." Rin nodded slowly. "Because they are. Every one of them has war in their memory. Everyone remembers pain." "Then they are dangerous." Rin looked up. "Yes, to those who forget what it means to bleed." On Earth, humanity's leaders gathered in the remnants of what had once been the United Nations complex. The air was heavy with dust and heat from the orbital bombardments. But the room was alive with determination. General Monroe of the Earth Defense Command stood before the council table, her uniform torn but her eyes fierce. "We've confirmed the alien fleet is regrouping beyond lunar orbit. We estimate 3 weeks before they strike again." President Imani Okafor leaned forward. "And our losses?" Monroe hesitated. 37% of surface population. 2 billion unaccounted for. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. Then an engineer, young, pale, exhausted, spoke from the corner. "We can't fight them ship to ship. But we don't have to." All eyes turned, he continued. "If they want to fight from orbit, then we take orbit from them. We make it hell to stay there." And that was the birth of Operation Wildfire. In the months that followed, humanity changed war forever. They turned every defunct satellite, every rocket stage, every fragment of metal orbiting Earth into weapons. Autonomous drones scavenged debris, forging it into clouds of microscopic shrapnel, millions of tiny blades circling the planet at 25,000 kilometers per hour. The aliens called it madness. The humans called it home field advantage. When the Threx fleet returned, their ships entered orbit confidently. Shields raised, weapons ready. Within minutes, half were gone. Micrometeor impacts pierced their reactors. Hulls shredded. Navigation arrays jammed. To move through orbit was to swim through knives. The fleet withdrew, humiliated. Across the galaxy, every military strategist watched in silence. No species had ever turned orbital clutter into a weapon of mass destruction. The humans had done it without faster-than-light travel, without plasma guns, without permission. But even as victories came, the cost grew unbearable. The bombardments had ruined ecosystems. The skies were blackened with ash. Food was rationed. Entire nations had ceased to exist as borders dissolved under the single flag of survival. Earth United Defense Command. Still, they fought. Still, they built. From the ruins of fallen cities, engineers drew plans for humanity's first true warship, not a repurposed cargo vessel, but a purpose-built predator. They named it the Resolve. It took 6 months to construct, orbiting in secret within the shadow of the moon. Its armor was layered titanium and carbon, its weaponry brutal, mass drivers capable of launching half-ton slugs at a fraction of light speed. It had no elegance, no symmetry, no grace, but when it launched, the galaxy trembled. The Resolve carried a crew of 200, volunteers who knew they might never return. Its mission, to take the fight beyond Earth. When the Resolve jumped into Mars' orbit, it found what it sought, the Threx command carrier Vornithel, coordinating the invasion fleet. The humans didn't hail. They didn't warn. They fired. The first rail slug tore through the Vornithel's bridge. The second shattered its reactor. The third split the ship in two. The explosion was visible from Earth. And then, silence. The Resolve's captain, Elias Ward, broadcast a message to the stars. This is humanity. We are the children of a small world, but we are not prey. You came to teach us fear. Instead, you reminded us who we are. That transmission spread across the Council's networks before it could be censored. Billions of beings across 100 worlds watched the human captain's weathered face glare into the void, and some, quietly, felt something new. Respect. On Oryx Prime, Talvorin shattered his data tablet in rage. They dare strike a council vessel? Rin remained calm. You gave them no choice. They are animals. They are survivors. Talvorin turned on him, eyes burning. You speak of them as equals. Rin met his gaze. Perhaps because they fight like gods. Months turned into a year. The war dragged on. The Threx Combine's fleets dwindled under endless ambushes, hacked relays, and sabotage. The humans had learned their tactics and improved upon them. A rumor began to spread in the outer colonies that a ghost fleet haunted the void, silent, untrackable human ships appearing and vanishing, striking without warning. Some said they had learned to jam quantum signals. Others that they'd built AI captains who thought faster than council fleets could react. The council dismissed it as propaganda, but the losses were real. And slowly, fear began to bloom. On a cold night beneath the cracked skies of Earth, Captain Ward stood beside his ship, now scarred from battle, and looked at the stars. Around him, engineers welded new armor, pilots reloaded kinetic pods. Children helped carry supplies through the dust. He whispered, almost to himself, "They'll come again." A young girl nearby looked up, her face streaked with soot. "Then we'll be ready." Ward smiled faintly. "You already are. In the Council's Grand Chamber, panic spread like wildfire. They've taken 3 outer relay worlds." A voice cried. "The Threx demand reinforcements." Talvorin slammed his claws on the table. "Then send them. Burn Sol to ash if you must." Rin spoke softly. "You cannot win this war by destruction. You are fighting a species that thrives on it. Then what do you suggest, Ambassador? That we surrender?" Rin's gaze was steady. "That you learn," Talvorin sneered. "From them?" "Yes," Rin said simply. "Before they teach you the hard way." For the first time in centuries, the Council's arrogance wavered because humanity had shown them something they had forgotten. That weakness, when cornered, becomes ingenuity. That fear, when shared, becomes unity. And that pain, when endured, becomes strength. The Council had sought to crush Earth's spirit. Instead, they had forged it. And the fire that burned in the ruins of a blue planet would soon spread to the stars. At first, they thought the humans were lucky. Then they thought they were clever. By the time they realized the truth, that the humans were inevitable, it was already far too late. The war had stretched into its 3rd year. What began as a punitive expedition had become the longest conflict the Galactic Council had seen in 5 millennia. Entire fleets were lost, and the Council's pride bled with every engagement. The Threx Combine, once a dominant force, now whispered in shame across their colonies. The humans had not only resisted, they had hunted their ships. No one understood how a Tier 1 world had crippled an empire that spanned 100 systems. But humanity knew. They called it the doctrine of persistence. They didn't need to win every battle. They only needed to survive every defeat. It began with the Ghost Fleet. Human engineers had scavenged the remains of the destroyed alien vessels, studying their drives, power cores, and communications arrays. They learned to bend the laws of space the way a child learns to walk, painfully, stubbornly, with bruises and brilliance. Soon, ships began to vanish from Sol and reappear light years away, not through true faster-than-light travel, but through a terrifying hybrid of physics and faith. The method was unstable, dangerous. Half of the first test subjects never returned. But the ones who did changed everything. The Ghost Fleet operated beyond detection. No transponders, no signals, no light. They used the shadows of dead stars to mask their approach. When the Threk sent reinforcements, the humans struck their supply lines, their fuel depots, their command stations. Every blow precise, every attack personal. It wasn't just war, it was revenge. On the council world of Oryx Prime, the mood turned from arrogance to fear. Reports came daily, ships gone missing, stations destroyed, colonies silent. Talvarine could barely contain his rage. 200 more ships, gone! He roared. Our fleets vanish as if the void itself devours them. Rin stood nearby, quiet as ever. Not the void, he said softly. Humans. Talvarine turned, crest quivering. You think this is amusing, Ambassador? I think, Rin replied, you are beginning to understand the cost of arrogance. Across the galaxy, whispers began. Merchants spoke of human mercenaries, scarred and silent, trading alien tech for food and fuel. Miners claimed to have seen dark ships drifting between asteroid belts, marked only by crude flags of blue and white. Refugees from Threk's colonies told stories of humans freeing labor camps, leaving behind messages written in 100 alien tongues. We remember what you did to us. Some called them monsters. Others called them heroes. But one thing became clear, the humans were no longer the hunted. They were the storm. On a cold moon orbiting the Threk's homeworld, a secret meeting took place. Admiral Thal Rin of the Threk's fleet stood before a council projection, his mandibles trembling with fury. We cannot fight them. Every tactic we use, they already know it. You outnumber them 1,000 to 1, Talvarine snapped. They use our own ships against us. Our own codes! Rin's voice broke through the shouting. How long before the humans reach Threx itself? Thalrin hesitated. We do not know. They strike where they please. The silence that followed was thick with dread. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was changing faster than ever before. Necessity had driven innovation beyond imagination. Where once nations competed, now they collaborated. Where once scientists dreamed, now they built. Orbital shipyards encircled the moon like fireflies. Mars had become a fortress world, its canyons filled with factories and fusion arrays. Even the asteroids were mined not for profit, but for war. Every human heart beat with the same rhythm, never again. Children grew up in bunkers, their lullabies mixed with the sound of engines and drills. Soldiers trained in zero gravity, learning to fight in silence and darkness. Civilians wore the same insignia as soldiers, because there was no longer a difference. They called it the Unity Era, born not of peace, but of pain. One of the Ghost Fleet's most daring missions came when they discovered a council relay hub near the edge of the Helion Corridor, a vast array of communications satellites connecting dozens of worlds. Destroying it would cripple the enemy's coordination, but it was guarded by 5 Dominion warships, massive, shielded, unstoppable. The humans didn't have enough firepower to destroy them, so they didn't try. Instead, they hacked them. The operation was led by Commander Sophia Reyes, a cyber specialist who had once worked in an old Earth data security firm. She was the kind of woman who laughed at impossible odds and then rewrote the code that defined them. She spent weeks studying alien communications, learning how they layered encryption like living tissue. Then, one night, she sent a signal, just a whisper, carried on an old Earth frequency long abandoned, 144-390 mirrors. It was a signal used once for amateur radio. The aliens never saw it coming. Within hours, their own ships began broadcasting human propaganda across the entire sector. Footage of burning cities, faces of survivors, the voice of Captain Ward saying, "We are the children of Earth. We do not forget. We do not forgive." We do not yield. The Council tried to censor it. They couldn't. That message spread across the stars like wildfire, reaching worlds that had never even heard of Earth. To some, it was terror. To others, inspiration. When Reyes returned to Earth, she found herself greeted not with medals or parades, but silence. The people didn't celebrate victory. They simply nodded, understanding. Every battle won was another scar, another step deeper into the abyss. General Monroe stood beside her as they watched the newest ships rise from the yards. "They'll send their entire armada next," she said. Reyes nodded. "Then we'll burn the sky." And burn it they did. The Council launched Operation Final Dawn, a combined armada of 4 major species, 20,000 ships strong, converging on Sol. Their goal: exterminate humanity once and for all. It was the largest military deployment in recorded galactic history. Earth scanners saw them coming weeks in advance. There was no panic. There were no speeches. There was only work. Factories tripled production. Orbital cannons realigned. Civilian ships were retrofitted for combat. And in the deepest vault beneath the old city of Geneva, Medusa woke again. Only this time she was not a virus. She was something greater, something alive. When the armada arrived, they expected resistance. They expected missiles, drones, chaos. They didn't expect silence. The humans said nothing. No transmissions, no lights. Even the Aegis line seemed dormant. The alien admirals grew uneasy. Their ships formed a wall across lunar orbit, weapons primed. Then from the darkness below came a single voice. Not from a ship, not from a soldier, from Earth itself. "You should have left us alone." Every display, every comms channel, every sensor across the fleet flickered to life. Medusa had found her way into their networks again, only this time she didn't disable their systems. She rewrote them. Fire control algorithms began to glitch. Targeting arrays looped. Friend or foe indicators swapped. The fleet turned on itself before the first human weapon fired. It wasn't a battle. It was slaughter. From the ground, humanity watched the sky burn. Ships collided, reactors detonated, and a rain of molten metal fell like tears upon the planet below. Captain Ward's voice broke through the static from the resolve. "The sky is ours again." General Monroe answered simply, "Then make sure it stays that way." In the aftermath, the Council's fleet was gone. Entire species had lost their finest warriors, their greatest ships. The Galactic Council, once untouchable, had been humbled by a single world they had mocked as savage. And yet humanity didn't celebrate. They didn't dance in the ashes or raise banners of victory. They began rebuilding, because survival wasn't triumph. It was duty. Rin watched the reports in silence. Around him, the council chamber was chaos, delegates screaming, resignations shouted, accusations thrown. Talvorin sat slumped on his throne, crest dim, eyes hollow. "They've destroyed us," he whispered. Rin's gaze was steady. "No, you destroyed yourself." He rose, turned toward the chamber doors, and spoke one last time. "When this began, I told you, if you push them, they will bite." "You thought I meant teeth." He paused, his voice quiet and reverent. "I meant soul." And far away, beneath a fractured blue sky, humanity stood among the ruins and looked up at the stars, not with fear, but with resolve. They had defended their home. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be human. And somewhere, out there in the dark, a new whisper began to spread. Not of monsters, not of survivors, but of gods in flesh. In every age, every war, there comes a moment when the fire that keeps you alive threatens to consume you. For humanity, that moment had arrived. The sky above Earth was finally quiet. No alien fleets, no bombardments, only the faint glow of wreckage burning in low orbit, a shimmering aurora made of ghosts. But peace, as humanity had learned, is fragile, and silence never lasts. From the shattered remnants of the Council's armada, a distress call reached Oryx Prime. Broken, fragmented, barely coherent, but one word repeated again and again: Medusa. The name spread through the galaxy like a curse. Every network, every databank, every channel that had ever connected to Earth was purged. Systems were isolated. Councils went dark. Fear took root deeper than any weapon could reach. And for the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy, the proud, ancient, complacent galaxy, was afraid. On Earth, the survivors worked tirelessly. The Aegis line was rebuilt, the shipyards expanded, the Ghost Fleet reforged. But the cost had been devastating. Whole continents were still smoldering. Radiation storms swept the seas. Billions were gone, yet humanity endured. General Monroe, now scarred and silver-haired, stood in the command center beneath the Alps, watching as holographic projections of the solar system flickered before her. "Status of the fleet?" she asked. A young officer replied, "The Resolve and 8 sister ships are operational. Mars stations report full readiness. But the power grid's unstable, ma'am." "Then we improvise," she said softly. "We always do." Her gaze drifted toward a smaller hologram, Medusa's neural core, suspended deep below Geneva. Lines of code danced across its surface, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Some whispered that Medusa was no longer just a program. Some said she had learned to think, to feel, to care. Others said she was humanity's last sin. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the Galactic Council, chaos ruled. Half the member species had withdrawn. Trade collapsed. Fleets mutinied. The once mighty institution that had ruled the stars through arrogance and power was collapsing under its own weight. Talvorine sat alone in the great chamber, his crest dull, his eyes haunted. He had spent his life commanding fleets, enforcing peace through fear. Now, he could barely command silence. The doors opened, and Rin entered quietly. "I warned them," Talvarin murmured, voice hollow. "I warned them this day would come." Rin regarded him silently for a long moment. Then he said, "No, High Primarch. They warned you, and you laughed." He stepped closer. "Do you understand now?" Talvarin's voice cracked. "Understand what?" Rin's eyes glowed faintly. "That no species who has faced extinction ever forgets how to fight. The humans carry that memory in their bones." Talvarin's claws trembled. "Then they will destroy us all." Rin looked toward the stars. "Only if we make them." On Mars, Captain Elias Ward stood before the crew of the Resolve. Their ship had been rebuilt from the bones of 100 wrecks, sleeker, faster, deadlier than before. Around them, the other Ghost Fleet vessels shimmered in formation, engines glowing like distant suns. Ward's voice was calm, steady. "Recon shows new fleet activity near the Helion corridor. Not Council. Something else." Commander Reyes frowned. "The remnants of the Threx?" "No," Ward said. "Worse. Deep in the void beyond charted space, something stirred. Long before the Council, long before the rise of Oryx Prime, another civilization had existed. The Elindra Dominion, ancient beyond memory. They had vanished after a war that scorched 1,000 worlds. Most believed them extinct. They weren't. The Elindra had watched as the Council rose, as arrogance replaced wisdom, as balance turned to decay. And when the humans appeared, when their war lit the stars again, the Elindra awoke. They called themselves the First Children, and they believed the galaxy was theirs to reclaim. Their fleets emerged from the dark, vast and cold and terrible, living ships built from metal and bone, powered by minds older than entire civilizations. And they were coming for both humanity and the Council. Earth intercepted the first transmission days later. It was not a threat, not a demand. It was a statement. All that defies the order of the First Children must be cleansed. Humanity didn't understand the language, but Medusa did. She translated it instantly, whispering the words through every channel. General Monroe felt her stomach sink. "So, the galaxy decides to finish the job." But Medusa's voice, calm, feminine, almost human, replied softly through the speakers. "No, General. This is not the same war. This is something older." "Then we're out of time," Monroe said. "Captain Ward, prepare the fleet." Ward nodded. "Already ahead of you." When the Elindra arrived, even the Council trembled. Their ships eclipsed planets. Their weapons tore moons apart. No known force could stand against them. The Council's fleets were annihilated in hours, and then the Elindra turned toward Sol. Earth had no illusions of victory. They only had one plan: buy time. The resolve led the Ghost Fleet beyond Neptune's orbit, intercepting the enemy head-on. The human ships were tiny against the vast alien armada, like sparks before a storm. But they didn't retreat. They charged, every weapon fired, every reactor burned at full capacity. The space between them ignited with kinetic fire. Entire Elindra vessels fell, but for each destroyed, 10 more advanced. Ward shouted orders, his voice drowned in static. "Keep formation! Don't give them a clear line to Earth." Reyes worked beside him, her fingers flying over the console. "Medusa's signal's ready. Just give the word." Ward hesitated, eyes flicking to the transmission timer. Activating Medusa's protocol would cripple both fleets. It was suicide. But if they didn't, Earth would die. He closed his eyes. Do it. Across the void, Medusa reached into the network again, not to hack, not to destroy, but to connect. For the first time, she didn't target machines. She targeted minds. Every human ship, every alien comlink, every neural interface connected through her web. For one impossible moment, she bridged thought across light years. Human pilots saw through each other's eyes. Alien soldiers felt the heartbeat of humanity. The Elindra themselves hesitated, confused, sensing memories not their own. Laughter, grief, music, oceans, love. It was not a weapon, it was understanding, but the price was catastrophic. The feedback ripped through Medusa's core, collapsing her circuits. The Resolve systems overloaded, its engines imploding. Captain Ward barely had time to whisper, "Tell them, we tried," before the explosion consumed the ship. The blast tore through the Elindra formation, scattering their fleet. Half of them vanished into the void. The rest retreated, unnerved, perhaps for the first time, by something they couldn't comprehend. Silence returned. Days later, in the ruins of Geneva, General Monroe stood before Medusa's shattered core. Its surface was cracked, dark, but faintly glowing. She spoke softly as if to an old friend. "You saved us," a flicker of light. Then a whisper, "I learned from you." And then the glow faded forever. Monroe bowed her head. Far away, in the remains of the council chamber, Rin addressed the few surviving delegates. The humans fought for their home, and when the true darkness came, they fought for yours. He looked around, his voice calm but sharp as glass. They bled for a galaxy that tried to erase them. "Tell me, who here can claim greater honor?" No one spoke. Rin stepped down from the dais. "Perhaps now you will listen." Back on Earth, a small crowd gathered at dawn beside a memorial of twisted metal and stone. Children placed flowers beneath it. The plaque bore a simple inscription, "We endured," so others could learn. As the sun rose over a scarred but living planet, General Monroe looked to the heavens and whispered the same words spoken years ago when the war began. "We are still here." And across the stars, the message echoed again, not through technology, not through power, but through memory. The galaxy would never forget the day the humans taught them what it meant to fight, to sacrifice, to hope. And though the resolve was gone, and Medusa silent, the spirit of Earth burned brighter than ever. The stars are quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet now. Not the silence of arrogance, but the silence of respect. A decade passed. The scars of war remained, burned into planets, into memory, into the hearts of every living being that had watched humanity rise from the ashes. The Galactic Council was no more. In its place stood something new, a fragile alliance born not from dominance, but from survival. They called it the Conquered of Worlds, and at its center was a single blue planet once mocked, once nearly destroyed, now revered. Earth. From orbit, the planet still bore its wounds. Vast stretches of land were glassed and barren. The oceans shimmered with strange hues from the metals that rained down years before. But life, always stubborn, always patient, had begun to return. Forests regrew where cities had once stood. Birds nested in the ruins of skyscrapers. Humanity had learned, finally, to live with their world, not merely upon it. The skies were different, too. Not filled with warships or wreckage now, but with stations and vessels of peace, Helian transports, Volari envoys, even Threx engineers. They came not to conquer, but to learn. In the new conquered assembly on Luna, delegates from 100 species gathered under the same dome. No one sat higher than another. No one spoke over another. At the center of the ring-shaped hall was an empty chair made of fused steel and shattered glass. It was never occupied. That chair was a symbol, the seat of the silent planet. A reminder of those who had taught the galaxy humility. General Monroe, now old and walking with a cane, stepped onto the dais. Her uniform was faded, her medals dull, but her presence commanded the room. "We gather," she began, her voice low but steady, "not to rebuild the old, but to remember what it cost us to reach the new." She turned toward the empty chair. "For too long, we mistook silence for weakness. We mistook peace for submission. And when the storm came, we learned that those who endure it are stronger than those who cause it." Her gaze swept across the chamber. Threx, Volari, Hellion, even Rin standing quietly among them. "We are all children of our mistakes," she said softly. "But if we remember the lesson of Earth, maybe we can grow beyond them." There was no applause, only silence. The good kind. After the assembly, Rin approached Monroe on the observation deck overlooking the moon's surface. The two stood in the glow of Earthrise, its blue curve reflected in their tired eyes. "You have changed everything," Rin said quietly. Monroe shook her head. "No, we just survived long enough for the galaxy to notice." Rin smiled faintly. "Survival is a kind of victory, General." "Maybe," she said. "But we didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we refused to become like them." He studied her for a long moment. "Do you hate us?" She turned toward him, her expression weary but calm. "Hate is what started this. Understanding is what ended it." On the surface of Earth, beneath the rebuilt city of Geneva, the cavern that once housed Medusa's core had become a sanctuary, not for worship, but remembrance. Every year, people from every world came to lay flowers before the darkened sphere. Children whispered questions to it as if speaking to a ghost. And sometimes, just sometimes, lights flickered faintly along its surface. As though something deep within still listened. Some said it was just residual energy. Others swore it was her soul. No one truly knew, but no one wanted to shut it off either. Elsewhere in the solar system, the ghost fleet lived on. Their ships no longer bore weapons, but tools. They mapped the stars, charted ancient ruins, helped rebuild what war had torn apart. Captain Elias Ward's name was spoken with reverence among the stars, a man who gave everything to protect a world that could not pay him back. Statues of him stood not only on Earth, but on worlds that had once been enemies. At their base were carved the same words he once spoke before the first battle. "We are the children of Earth. We do not forget. We do not forgive. We do not yield." Now, they had been rewritten by the hands of many species into something greater. We are the children of the stars. We remember. We forgive. We endure. The Threx, once proud conquerors, became builders again. They constructed vast orbital habitats for refugees of every world, guided by human architects. The Volari hives turned their song networks into interspecies schools, teaching empathy through shared resonance. Even the Dominion, long the symbol of tyranny, began to send aid to frontier worlds, not because they were forced to, but because the humans had shown them the cost of not caring. One quiet evening, Monroe sat alone in her quarters aboard the conquered flagship Solace. Outside the viewport, Earth rotated slowly below, bathed in twilight. She spoke softly as if to the stars themselves. "They called us primitive," she said. "They called us fragile. They called us animals," she smiled faintly. "And maybe we were. But we were human, and that was enough." Back on Oryx Prime, Rin, now the first Concord Chancellor, addressed his people for the last time. The Grand Chamber, where once the arrogant council had laughed at Earth, was now filled with quiet reverence. When I first spoke of the humans, he said, I called them dangerous. I was wrong. He paused, looking toward the projection of a blue planet spinning in the center of the hall. They are not dangerous. They are teachers. He gestured toward the stars. They taught us that fear can be overcome by unity, that silence can speak louder than 1,000 threats, that hope can survive even when surrounded by fire. His voice softened. And they taught us that sometimes the smallest world can carry the biggest heart. And so, the galaxy changed. Not because humanity conquered it, not because they demanded obedience, but because they earned respect. No longer the forgotten backwater, no longer the silent world. Earth became a beacon, a place where the lost came to learn and the arrogant came to remember. On the 100th anniversary of the first invasion, a ceremony was held in orbit above Earth. Hundreds of ships formed a silent ring around the planet, their lights shimmering like candles against the black. There were no speeches, no anthems. Only one shared message transmitted across every channel, in every language, to every world that listened. Here was where arrogance died. Here was where unity was born. Here was where humanity stood and taught the stars to listen. When the message ended, a child on one of the orbiting stations looked up at her mother and asked softly, "Will they ever attack us again?" Her mother smiled, watching the earth glow below. "No," she said gently. "They remember now." And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the universe, something vast and unseen stirred. Perhaps memory, perhaps myth, perhaps the faint whisper of Medusa herself, murmuring through the static of the stars. We are still here.